भारत की कहानी
मीनाक्षी लेखी की जुबानी।
Namaste, hello friends. As a part of celebrating Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav, we ran a podcast series called Bharat Ki Kahani Meenakshi Lekhi Ki Zubani. 75 stories for 75 days run up to India's 75th Independence Day. Now, these stories, which were earlier available on the website of Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav, Spotify and various other platforms, will now be available to NAMO app virtual meet as Bharat Ki Kahani Meenakshi Lekhi Ki Zubani. Happy listening, keep listening, and stay tuned to NAMO app. It's an initiative of NAMO app volunteers. I thank them all through you.
भारत की कहानी
मीनाक्षी लेखी की जुबानी। आजादी के लिए प्राणाहुति देने वाले 75 अनाम वीरों की 75 कहानियां मीनाक्षी लेखी की जुबानी।
Hello friends, Namaste, Namaskar. Let me tell you the story of a rare breed of freedom fighters today. One whose heroism will leave you not just in awe but also grateful for what he did for his motherland. The story of Sher Jung, who was called the Lion of Himachal Pradesh and was so sharp with his military acumen that he was conferred the rank of colonel by the authorities concerned in 1948. Despite not being a part of the army, Sher Jung showed signs of rare courage right in his childhood, and those who saw him grow knew that his valor and daredevilry would make him a legend one day. Sher Jung had suffered rigorous imprisonment of 3 months while he was still a teenager. It is a matter of great misfortune that Sher Jung, despite his incomparable contribution to the freedom struggle of India, has been relegated to the dusty annals of forgotten history. Born on November 27, 1906 in Nahan, in Sirmaur district to Chaudhry Pratap Singh, Sher Jung was a true blue Rajput boy who could not bear any kind of injustice or unfairness. He was not just a member of Bhagat Singh's Hindustan Socialist Republican Army (HSRA), but had also been trained so expertly in guerrilla warfare that he was roped in to further train the Mukti Vahini. For his role in the freedom struggle, particularly for his association with Bhagat Singh, Sher Jung spent 14 years in jail. Sher Jung was opposed to oppressive forces, whether they were the British or the feudal and princely lords. In accordance to his belief, he joined the Praja Mandal, a body formed by common people of princely states all over the country that fought against any kind of colonialism and feudalism, irrespective of the color of the skin of the oppressor. The first signs of trouble from the Praja Mandal came from the Nilgiri hills, where the demand of farmers for more than just laws was met with even a more oppressive and brutal response from the ruler. Sher Jung became a very aggressive member of the Praja Mandal in Himachal Pradesh, where his sole aim was to oust the royalty ruling in Sirmaur, the princely state in Himachal that Sher Jung belonged to. Sher Jung had rebellion ingrained in him. As a child, he defied the elders in his house, even his teachers. In fact, he dropped out of school in class 4 because he could not stand the bad behavior of a teacher towards his students. Sher Jung was particularly disturbed by the reprimand of a particular teacher to his students, and as a mark of protest, left school forever. With no school to attend, the young rebel had all the time to wander around in the jungles surrounding his beautiful Himalayan village. Sher Jung developed a deep and loving bond with nature during these endless wanderings amidst nature. He carried this unending love even to the jail when he was imprisoned for long periods. In those days and years of confinement, Sher Jung managed to keep himself hopeful by imagining and dreaming of the same jungles that he had walked through as a child. Sher Jung had a knack for languages which he seemed to have inherited from his father, who was a scholar of Farsi and Urdu. Sher Jung learned from him. While in jail, he learned German, Farsi, Urdu, Hindi and Bengali. One of his jailmates during his term behind the bars in the 1930s was the Hindi literature stalwart Agya. It was from this scholar that Sherjung learnt Hindi. In fact, Agya, who knew Sherjung closely, made the most accurate observation of him in these words. As a child, he defied elders. As high caste, he was anti-social order system. As courtier, he was anti-princedom. As thinker, he was anti-conservatism. As citizen, he was anti-society. As subject, he was anti-establishment. As prisoner, he was anti-government. Leading the life of a rebel, he got tired, got disappointed, cried sometimes, failed often, but never lost the zest. In his childhood, Sherjung had spent time with a French tutor who got him to idolize the idea of the French Revolution. As he grew up, his family sent him to Lahore to live with his sister. There, where he made friends with Bhagat Singh and Batukeshwar Dutt, and joined the Hindustan Socialist Republican Association with the aim of inspiring common people to rise against the British. Soon after, Bhagat Singh and B.K. Dutt's arrest in 1929, two other revolutionaries, Chandrasekhar and Bhagwati Charan Vora, planned to force free Bhagat Singh and Dutt from the central jail in Lahore through a group attack. The attack required money and weapons. Sherjung was chosen and given the task of looting the government treasury on the Ahmedgarh train and buy arsenal from the money obtained in the loot. His team included Sahib Singh Salana, Harnam Singh and Charnak. On October 15, 1929, Sherjung intercepted the train between Ahmednagar, Malerkotla and Cook on the Ludhiana-Dhuri Jakhal line and attempted to loot it. The news of the dacoity was carried even in the Sydney Morning Herald on Friday, 18th October 1929. To escape the police, Sherjung hid himself in the forest of Nahan, Sirmaur, that he knew like the back of his hands. The British police launched an extensive search for Sherjung but could not find him. Exasperated, they announced a reward of 30,000 rupees for any information on him. Posters with Sherjung's picture and a caption in bold letters announcing "Wanted dead or alive" were pasted on every nook and corner of every town and village. Sherjung had been successful in dodging the British police for a long time, hiding behind different disguises and identities. When Sherjung figured that the bounty put on him could actually be used by his party for nationalist work, he spoke to his father, who had been of the opinion that he should surrender to the police. In March 1930, Sherjung gave himself up to the Ambala police on his father's directions and was sentenced to death. The sentence was later commuted to life imprisonment, with Sherjung spending 14 years in prison and another 5 years of confinement in Delhi. After he came out of jail, Sherjung married his longtime friend Nirmala, who had regularly visited him in jail as a journalist deputed to interview Sherjung by the editor of the Tribune. Such was Sherjung's popularity that in Lahore College students would sing songs about Sherjung's bravery. In fact, this fact was corroborated by none other than the former Prime Minister I.K. Gujral, who had written about the same in his accounts of his college days in the Lahore College. Evidence of Sherjung's rare bravery lies in his hunting expeditions in the Shivaliks, where he had killed several man-eating tigers with his bare hands. Coming from a family of some courageous hunters, Sherjung's first ever hunt was in 1920 at the tender age of 14. In the days when Sherjung inhabited the Shivalik Hills, the area had many man-eating and cattle-eating tigers. It was the compulsion of saving people and cattle from tigers that had turned Sherjung into a hunter. At heart and later in life, he remained a devout conservationist and environmentalist, working on tiger conservation after the World Wildlife Fund launched a project to save the tiger in 1972. Post-independence, Sherjung was given the task of looking after refugees who had come to Delhi, so he took charge of the refugee camps in Delhi and worked with those displaced. He even raised 2 battalions of the Kashmir National Militia to hit out against the Pakistani Mujahideen raiders when they raided Kashmir in 1947. Impressed by his military and warfare acumen, when he fought the Mujahideens along with the Indian Army, Sher Jung was bestowed with the rank of colonel by the state government in 1948. He led guerrilla units against Portuguese in Goa from 1953 to 1961. In 1967, Sher Jung with his assistant Das Gupta crossed over to East Pakistan and also trained and led the Mukti Vahini against the army in East Pakistan movement in 1971. Such was his sense of justice that Sher Jung once pulled out his pistol and shot through the mouth a captive Pakistani soldier who had brutally raped an 8-year-old girl. In his lifetime, Sher Jung authored as many as 10 books, including The Tryst with Tigers, Rambling in Tigerland and Gun Law, Prison Days, Aur Ek Pareen, which means Withered Leaves, Lorja, and Ek Aur Anek Shan. He also wrote about Karl Marx and his life. His translations of philosophers Friedrich Nietzsche into Hindi are considered the best ever. He even wrote poetry in Urdu under the pen name Naksh. Sher Jung passed away on December 15, 1996. His last rites were performed in Ganguwal in Sirmaur. As a mark of respect to Sher Jung's legendary contribution, the Symbol Bara National Park in Sirmaur, Himachal Pradesh in the mid-2000s was renamed Sher Jung National Park, even though Sher Jung has been forgotten by people over 2 decades after his death. His contribution to India's freedom struggle remains unparalleled. In this Amrit Kal, we remember all such forgotten heroes, without whom India could not have achieved its independence. Just 3 days to go. Jai Hind, Jai Bharat.
भारत की कहानी
मीनाक्षी लेखी की जुबानी। आजादी के लिए प्राणाहुति देने वाले 75 अनाम वीरों की 75 कहानियां मीनाक्षी लेखी की जुबानी। आप सुनेंगे अमृत महोत्सव पोर्टल पर 1 जून 2022 से रोजाना।
भारत की कहानी
मीनाक्षी लेखी की जुबानी। आजादी के लिए प्राणाहुति देने वाले 75 अनाम वीरों की 75 कहानियां मीनाक्षी लेखी की जुबानी।
Hello friends, Namaste, Namaskar. India's freedom was not just hard earned. It has taken a humongous amount of silent individual sacrifices and dedication to build this country into a great nation. While many freedom fighters lost their lives struggling to free India from the shackles of slavery, there were others who aggressively participated in the fight for freedom, lived to see their dream come true, and continued to work towards nation building well into their sunset years. One such freedom fighter who stood up against the British tyranny from his childhood was Thakur Vishwanarayan Singh, unsung but hugely respected for his work, first as a freedom fighter and later as a nation builder. Working with the blind, Vishwanarayan was the India's first Braille editor who brought light into the lives of 10 million blind of the country. Born on 30th July 1928 in Nagpur, to Thakur Beni Madhav Singh and Madhavi Devi, Vishwanarayan was the youngest son among 3 brothers and 2 sisters, lovingly called Chote at home. Vishwanarayan grew up in Nagpur in the midst of strict police discipline since his father was a senior police officer with the British forces and his mother's spiritual and nationalist leanings. Vishwanarayan picked up best of both the worlds. His father's service with the British police ensured that he was schooled at the Bishop Cotton School in Nagpur and Hislop College later, helping him get an excellent command of the English, a skill that he used as early as childhood to fight against the British imperialism. Despite Vishwanarayan's father's service, his family was traditionally very supportive of the freedom struggle. Vishwanarayan's inspiration came into his great-grandfather who had served the Holkar kings in a prominent positions and fought the Mughals and the British. His grandfather has served as the commander-in-chief of the Holkar army and devoted himself to fight against the British. Young Vishwanarayan would hear the stories of his ancestors' valor and ached to do the same. Once Vishwanarayan was playing in the compound of his family home with his siblings when they saw a procession passing by with people holding placards in their hand and chanting Bhagat Singh Amar Rahe. This intrigued the children, so they went to the gate to give the children a closer look at themselves. The procession halted there for a few minutes. Vishnarayan's father, who was sitting in the veranda, walked to the gate barefoot, folded his hands and paid respect to the picture of Bhagat Singh that revolutionaries were carrying. The procession moved on after that and the children went back to play. A little later, news arrived that Vishnarayan's father, Thakur Beni Madhav Singh, had been suspended by the British for supporting the freedom fighters as they protested against the hanging of Bhagat Singh, Sukhdev and Rajguru. Thakur Beni Madhav stood his ground and said he had made no mistake. After a few months of suspension, Beni Madhav was reinstated, but this incident left a big impression on Vishnarayan's mind. All along, at home, Vishnarayan's mother would always tell her children the stories of freedom fighters. Inspired, Vishnarayan soon joined Bal Sena, a small group of children participating in freedom struggle at their own level. This Bal Sena was similar to Vanar Sena formed in other parts of the country. The Bal Sena, an espionage service of its own kind, would collect a group of children to pass on relevant information to the revolutionaries. Since the children were very little, they would not be suspected as informants. It was easy for them to enter any area, go past important buildings, pass information, and leave undetected. Vishnarayan was particularly useful in these operations because he had a mastery over the English language and could understand the conversations of the British officers and even read documents in English. Access to important buildings was also very easy for him, considering he was the son of a senior police officer and could eavesdrop without being shooed away. He started getting important and frequent assignments because of this. Vishnarayan's playground therefore shifted from his home compound to areas around important government buildings. He would often carry messages in his school bag and hand it over to the concerned people without drawing any suspicion from the police. In places where access was denied to ordinary Indians, Vishnarayan would be engaged by the revolutionaries to conduct odd jobs related to the freedom struggle. Vishwa with his friends would hand-stitch a cotton cloth national flag and go around singing nationalistic songs in their neighborhood. In other parts of the city, the Bal Sena was involved in acting drama and even hoisting the flag on government buildings. In one such incident, a 12-year-old boy was shot dead by the British. It is said that perhaps 1 lakh children were a part of such children's armies at a given point in India. In 1942, the Quit India movement was announced by Mahatma Gandhi and people joined in large numbers to protest against the British rule. One among them was young Vishnarayan. While school continued, he carried on with the non-cooperation at home, carrying western wear from home and burning the clothes as a mark of protest at the market square. He would wake up in the wee hours to participate in Prabhat Fairies, walking along with the freedom fighters demanding freedom for the country from the cruel imperialist rule of the British. At home, Vishwa insisted that khadi should be worn by all. His mother, Madhavi Devi, and sisters gave up silk and started wearing khadi saris only on his insistence. In his poems, Vishnarayan often compared British officers to Raman and wished them destruction. These poems became very popular among young revolutionaries in Nagpur. With Mahatma Gandhi's call for do or die, Nagpur was on a boil. All the main leaders were put into jail by the British. On August 12, 1942, a rally was organized demanding the release of the leaders from jail. The police fired on the unarmed demonstrators, killing 4 satyagrahis. Anger amongst the people grew. An even bigger rally was called for the next day. Underground messaging was sent across the city for all the people to gather on the streets of Nagpur to demonstrate to the British. That day, Vishnarayan ran from place to place, passing many of these messages. Fearing the unrest, his family told him to leave from school the next day and stay put. But Vishnarayan disobeyed them and went to school as per schedule. However, once out of the house in the morning, he discarded his uniform, changed into regular clothes and joined the protesters. The streets were a sea of thousands of demonstrators shouting anti-British slogans and singing patriotic songs. Vishnarayan Narayan joined in. Many of his acquaintances were there too. Vishnu Narayan must have been part of the rally for about 2 hours when the news came that police had opened fire on the rally. People started running helter-skelter and someone told Vishnu Narayan to go home. Instead, he made his way to the city hospital. There, as bodies kept coming, he first helped the injured into the hospital and then helped them get first aid. At least 17 people were killed and 50 injured in the rally that day, that evening. Much after school hours, when he reached home with blood-sullied clothes, his family was worried and reprimanded him. Nagpur kept boiling with protest rallies where Vishnu Narayan joined in actively. By now, he was writing articles in newspapers as a tool to mobilize his school and later college friends to support the freedom movement. Around this time, Vishnu Narayan joined the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh and actively started working on nationalistic activities. In one of the meetings of the RSS, Vishnu Narayan came across another young man who was 4 years his senior and was also keen on writing poetry. The two hit off immediately, and besides engaging in nationalistic activities, they would also spend time reciting verses to each other, some written by them, some by the other great poets of their time. This young man was Atal Bihari Vajpayee, the former Prime Minister of the country. Their love for the written word and their motherland grew into such strong bond that even when Vajpayee moved into nationalist politics and Vishnu Narayan moved into journalism, first and then working for the blind, they would stay in touch through letters and long-distance phone calls when possible. On many occasions, very quietly, Vajpayee would seek Vishnu Narayan's opinion on important matters, given that he valued his honest opinion and clear thinking. Their friendship carried on through their sunset years, with handwritten letters being their favorite mode of communication. Post 1947, Vishnu Narayan was assigned the job of helping change public opinion in Hyderabad, and he succeeded at it through reports and editorials. In his national daily Bharat, on the merits of acceding states to the Indian Union in support of Sardar Patel, Vishnu Narayan also actively participated in Goa liberation movement. Much later, he also worked tirelessly in negotiating the talks of the surrender of dacoit Thakur Tehsildar Singh, the son of the famous dacoit Man Singh from Chambal, working hard to bring the dacoits back into the mainstream. Vishnu Narayan later cleared the civil services, opted for the Indian Information Service to become the first ever Braille editor of India in Dehradun's Braille Press. At a time when there were no books for visually impaired people, he converted Indian literature into Braille, mainly the Ramayana, Mahabharata, Hanuman Chalisa and Bhagavad Gita. He also started the talking book library in India, where the books were read out and recorded for easy references for the visually impaired. Vishnu Narayan also started a monthly magazine called Nayan Rashmi and Alok, which carried news and important information for the blind. For his services, Thakur Vishnu Narayan Singh was awarded the prestigious Soviet Land Nehru Award in 1977 by the then Minister of External Affairs, Shri Atal Bihari Vajpayee, who called him the father of Braille literature in India. Few years later, under the Congress government, he was punished for his association with the RSS, when a Padma Shri award for his work with the blind was first announced and later denied to him, stating that he had been part of the RSS. He also received the Indian Council for Child Education Award and the Tulsi Manas Samman for his work in Indian literature. He breathed his last on 29 September 2009. Long after Thakur Vishnu Narayan Singh's gone, his contribution to India's freedom and nation building remains exemplary and exceptional. He remains a quiet, unsung giant with his work. Just 2 days to go. Jai Hind, Jai Bharat.
भारत की कहानी
मीनाक्षी लेखी की जुबानी। आजादी के लिए प्राणाहुति देने वाले 75 अनाम वीरों की 75 कहानियां मीनाक्षी लेखी की जुबानी। आप सुनेंगे अमृत महोत्सव पोर्टल पर 1 जून 2022 से रोजाना।
भारत की कहानी
मीनाक्षी लेखी की जुबानी। आजादी के लिए प्राणाहुति देने वाले 75 अनाम वीरों की 75 कहानियां मीनाक्षी लेखी की जुबानी।
Hello friends, Namaskar. Today I bring to you a very different story. This story is about how our thinkers and spiritual gurus awakened the consciousness of the people of our country. The idea of a nation is in the minds of people. It is an emotional connect of people with the country's national heritage, civilization, art and culture, as well as struggles through centuries that create the foundation for people to commit to nation building and even sacrifice their lives for it. However, this awakening of the soul of hundreds of millions of people and their realization that protecting the nation and freeing it from the clutches of colonial empires requires a generation of poets, writers, thinkers, and to act as catalysts to metamorphose millions of ordinary people into committed nationalist soldiers willing to give up their everything for the sake of nation's independence and securing its future. Therefore, the saga of India's national movement from independence from British rule would be incomplete unless the tales of such poets, writers, and thinkers are narrated to understand how the awakening of the soul and the galvanization of people was made successful while their written and spoken words. The land of tolerance, India dived into dimensional warfare, where we witnessed an amalgamation of physical, psychological, and a spiritual one. On one hand, there were likes of Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, Rani Lakshmi Bai, Bhagat Singh, Tatya Tope, and several others who made it a point to act against the tyranny of the invaders on ground with the sword or a gun. On the other hand, we had these leaders who followed the path of spiritual enlightenment amongst people and awakened their conscience and lit the light of nationalism deep in their hearts. India has been a country steeped in spirituality and nationalism. Very often, spiritual and cultural leaders have stepped out of their expected roles to contribute to the freedom struggle of India. These leaders have been exceptional influencers who put their popularity and connect with the people to good use. While these have been a large number of such leaders, here we have the stories from the four corners of the country to provide a clear picture of what cultural renaissance was happening in the country that led to the freedom struggle being a success. Let me start with the story of Bhai Bhagwan Singh from Punjab. Bhai Bhagwan Singh was a Granthi who received religious education in Updeshak College in Gujranwala. He went on to join the Gadar movement and waged war against the British with such dedication that he became a force to reckon with in the freedom struggle. Born in 1884, Bhagwan Singh was prepared for a career as a religious teacher and worked as a lecturer in a college until he travelled to North and Northwest India. Here he witnessed a series of protests led by Lala Lajpat Rai and Sardar Ajit Singh against the Land Bill of 1907, agrarian reforms and recommendations made by the Simon Commission. At a meeting in Lailpur, now Faisalabad, in Pakistan, Prabha Dayal, the editor of the Jhang Sayal, recited the poem Pagdi Sambhal Jatta, which left a deep impression on young Bhagwan Singh's mind. Bhagwan Singh decided to travel to Burma, Siam, Indonesia and Singapore in 1909, where he preached nationalism to the Indian soldiers stationed in foreign lands. In Malay, he served as a Granthi at various Gurdwaras. Later, he worked as a Granthi in Hong Kong. Listening to Bhagwan Singh, the local soldiers started preparing to join the freedom movement. Perturbed by Bhagwan Singh's actions, the British authorities jailed him twice, once in 1911 and again in 1912 in Hong Kong. In May 1913, after sending his wife and 3 children back to India, Bhai Bhagwan Singh went to Canada. Being a powerful orator, he used the power of motivating poetry to garner support against the British Empire. For his activism, Bhagwan Singh was arrested on 18th November 1913 and deported to Hong Kong. Bhagwan Singh managed to alight at Japan. In 1914, he left for Germany to secure arms for the Ghadar uprising, but the same was discovered by the British and he was sent back to Hong Kong. He escaped the British eye and returned to Japan, where he met Rajbihari Bose. For his unending loyalty to the freedom movement, Bhagwan Singh was made president of the Ghadar Party. While he was in the USA, trying to increase the influence of the Ghadar Party, he was arrested and imprisoned for 2 years. Here he wrote articles on Indian philosophy. He continued to work for the freedom movement until India got independence in 1947. After he sent his family back home, Bhagwan Singh was so deep in the work of freedom struggle that he never managed to ever meet his wife again, who breathed her last in 1950. Bhagwan Singh returned to India in 1958 and died in 1962. Meanwhile, in Uttar Pradesh, Sadguru Sadafal Deo Ji Maharaj, a 20th century spiritual leader, a mystic poet and saint, was doing his bit for the freedom struggle. He was born on 25th August 1888 into a renowned yogi family in Pakri village of Balia, Uttar Pradesh. Sadafal Deo's grandfather, Baba Lalji Rao, was a great yogi who would sit in firm yogic position in meditation for 6 months continuously. At an early age, Sadafal went to Kashi to learn Sanskrit as he wanted to understand ancient scriptures, which were the secret to reaching God and divine knowledge. But the scholars in Kashi refused to teach him, as Sanskrit scriptures were only taught to Brahmins and Sadafal was a Kshatriya by birth. Disappointed by the decision of Kashi scholars, Sadafal decided to practice yoga as meditation, which would lead him to knowledge of divine truth. Sadafal practiced Anmuni Mudra, which helps in controlling the mind. While practicing yoga inside Vritikut Ashram in Pakri, he met Nitya Anandai Sadguru Kabir Sahib. The Guru introduced him to Vihangam Yoga. Sadafal undertook many yoga anushtans. Pleased with his great sacrifice and perseverance, Sadguru blessed Maharishi Sadafal with the authority of Sadguru and transferred the divine Brahma Vidya to him. It was an auspicious moment as Sadguru Sadafal Deo was enlightened with complete Brahma Vidya. In 1924, he established Vihangam Yoga, the Indian school of yoga and meditation, to spread the simple form of devotion. From a very early age, Sadafal Deo had been dreaming of and visualizing free India. He educated people on fighting against the British. He delivered fiery speeches at Dinapur cantonment during the non-cooperation movement. As a result, he was arrested on 26 December 1920. He was released from rigorous imprisonment on 12 October 1922. His prayer to God for the freedom of the country is still famous, and all his disciples, including freedom fighters in jail, repeated it until India attained freedom. This was Adhyatmik Prayog, a spiritual effort towards attainment of freedom. After spreading yoga for 35 years, he took Mahasamadhi on 11th February 1954 while sitting in yogic posture at Junsi Ashram in Allahabad, Uttar Pradesh. After renouncing his body, Sadguru Sadafal spoke with his disciples from void, Akashvani, for 15 minutes. He said, "I want to show all the great scientists, social thinkers and reformers, and all those great philosophers of the world that how a yogi in India leaves his mortal frame on his own will." He authored more than 30 books in which he compiled his divine knowledge and experience of Brahmagyan in the form of dohas, and in the last few years he transferred Sadguru Padvi to his son and granted him the right to teach Vihangam Yoga. Close by in West Bengal, another important freedom fighter, who's also known as poet, scholar, yogi and philosopher, was starting an educational system which was devoid of rote learning. Till date, important educational institutions still follow his principles of teaching. This man was none other than Sri Aurobindo Ghosh. Born on 15th August 1872 in Calcutta, Aurobindo's father Krishnadhan was a doctor. At the age of 5, Aurobindo was sent to Loreto Convent School at Darjeeling. He completed his schooling from St. Paul's in London and then took admission in Cambridge. Following the wishes of his father, Aurobindo took the ICS exam and passed it, but failed to clear the horsemanship test, because of which he was not allowed to enter the services of the ICS. Upon his return to India, he taught at the State College of Baroda as vice principal, but later on resigned to join the Bengal National College. As the partition of Bengal was announced, Aurobindo joined the freedom movement. He started an English daily newspaper titled Bande Mataram, where he wrote about British atrocities. He advocated the boycott of British goods, courts, and asked people to follow passive resistance. Aurobindo was arrested for supporting the revolutionaries involved in the Alipur bomb case. He was put in solitary confinement in Alipur Central Jail for a year. Aurobindo utilized this time for study and practice of teachings of Bhagavad Gita. It was Chittaranjan Das who fought the legal case of Aurobindo. After his release, Aurobindo practiced meditation and migrated to Pondicherry in 1910, where he founded an ashram. In 1914, he launched Arya, a 64-page monthly review and essays on Gita, the secret of Veda, Upanishads, and foundation of Indian culture. In 1926, Aurobindo retired from public life. The goal of Sri Aurobindo was not merely liberation of an individual, but also self-realization. Sri Aurobindo passed away on 5th December 1950 at the age of 78 in Pondicherry. Aurobindo was a multifaceted personality who brought freedom to the country, read Indian scriptures, wrote essays on culture, and took on meditation. The ashram set up by him is still visited by many people from across the globe. Now we recall about Thiruvallur, an Indian poet and philosopher whose efforts were mostly into making people of this nation understand about the trap of desire and attachments in our regular common life. We can easily find out these things that we are attached to. We usually do not want to lose things that make us happy. When India was invaded and was under the British Mughal rule, getting detached from family and taking up arms to fight against the British was, of course, something where death is mostly inevitable. Here, the work of Thiruvallur was something that made people to understand the concept of detachment. Vivekananda also tried to make people understand the concept of detachment. The more people possess materialistic desire, the more they will be weakened by the enemies. So Thiruvallur, through his poetries and writings, was successful in evoking the concept of detachment from deep within, and it motivated many to love their nation. These are just a few of the stories of cultural and spiritual gurus that I'm telling you, but in the past we have had many religious leaders and spiritual gurus who have shown the path for others to follow. To name a few, Swami Dayanand Saraswati, who was an Indian philosopher, social leader, and founder of the Arya Samaj, a reform movement which advocated for the return of Hinduism. He was the first to give the call for Swaraj as India for Indians. In 1876, he revived Vedic ideologies. He worked for equal rights of women and right to education. The contributions of spiritual and cultural leaders, however unsung, has shaped the destiny of India. Their work is praiseworthy and their sacrifice huge. They evoked a mass movement and spiritual awakening amongst people, where the teachings like selfless devotion to a cause, love for nation, detachment from materialism, was embraced by the huge population of Bharatvarsh that helped in freeing India from the clutches of the British rule. India could not have achieved its independence if it was not for these great spiritual saints who awakened the souls of many. India is a unique country wherein every time it faced adverse times, a saint emerged to change the course of time. Whenever the country needed spiritual regeneration, sages like Sri Aurobindo, Subramanyam Bharati came to the fore. It is only in India that spiritualism runs in political movements as well, and the history is a testament to the fact. It is unfortunate that this spiritual current in our freedom struggle was not recorded in history as it should have been part of the freedom movement. It is imperative that we remember the contributions of our great gurus and saints in the freedom struggle and make the new generation aware about it. Just one last time, one more day to go for the historic day, our 75th India's Independence Day. Jai Hind, Jai Bharat.
भारत की कहानी
मीनाक्षी लेखी की जुबानी। आजादी के लिए प्राणाहुति देने वाले 75 अनाम वीरों की 75 कहानियां मीनाक्षी लेखी की जुबानी आप सुनेंगे अमृत महोत्सव पोर्टल पर 1 जून 2022 से रोजाना।